Good evening, assalamu alaikum, and a very warm welcome to Visionary Pulse with me, your host Farzana Mayet, a segment that focuses on chatting to game changers and change makers. And tonight is certainly no different, as we are going to be chatting to one such game changer and change maker. We say a very good evening and a warm welcome to Martin Pelders, who is a keynote speaker on psychological safety and DEI in the workplace. He is also the founder of MatrixMen, the first organization in Africa to support men who have suffered childhood trauma. Martin also authored The Pumpkin Van, a biography on his life and journey to starting a support group for men in South Africa. His latest book is called Guard the Gate, a book on biblical masculinity, the gender war, and where society has gone wrong in its treatment of boys. Martin focuses on the issues that if men are the problem, why are we not fixing men? In a country where 44% of all boys have endured sexual abuse by age 18, we need to quickly set up structures for them to be able to get the support they deserve. There is a reason South Africa is the rape, femicide, GBV, and capital of the world. This is the title that we can shed if we heal the broken boys who grow up to be angry men. Wow, Martin, this is incredible. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining me on Visionary Pulse.
Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it.
So, Martin, your journey is deeply personal. What was the turning point that led you to start MatrixMen?
Farzana, I was most of my life, I was an addict, alcoholic, angry, very misguided young man. And I struggled, I really did. Emotionally, I tried to commit suicide 5 times. So, from the age of 16, that was my first attempt, and then there were 4 attempts again in my 20s, in my early 20s. I had incredibly low self-esteem. I used to change jobs every year. I would just change careers. Not just go from one company doing this to another company doing the same thing. I would just entirely different career. So
you were just not at peace, not happy with yourself?
Never happy.
Wow.
And I couldn't figure that out. And for the longest time, I struggled with it, and I thought this was what life was all about. It was a deep depression. I tried everything that society prescribed to me. I bought the house, I got married, I had the children, I got the dogs, the cars, the TVs. Nothing made me happy. And eventually one day I sat down and I was watching a TV show, Oprah Winfrey, in fact.
Right.
And it was a show called The 200 Men with Tyler Perry. And there, 200 men were talking about the fact that they were raped and sexually abused as children. And I sat there, and it was the weirdest idea for me, because these men were in Chicago, and here I am at the bottom tip of South Africa, of Africa, and they understood me. They got me. They spoke about me in ways that only I thought I understood, but they seemed to have an insight about my life that I didn't have. And eventually, it was the strangest thing, because every time one of the guys would say, when I was raped as a child, my brain would say, no, that wasn't me. Or they would say, when I was sexually abused, or when he molested me, or whatever, my brain would say to me, no, that wasn't you. But right at the end, the guy stood up and he said, I just want to tell you something, that if you have children, you will never hurt them because you love them too much. And that was the one for me. That punched me in the stomach. It felt like I had a blow to my...
All the air was knocked out of you.
Man, yeah. It was crazy, because I remember one day I had a daughter, or I have a daughter, sorry, and I was changing her nappy, and this little devil popped up on my shoulder and he said to me, oh, you're going to hurt her, you're going to do something to her. And then this angel popped up on this shoulder. It was like a comic strip, And the angel said, no, you won't, you love her too much. And this war started in my head. And my way of dealing with it was, I knew that if I could come home and get drunk enough, fast enough, my wife wouldn't let me touch my daughter. So I was already a heavy drinker. I would drink every night when I came home. But this escalated. So going from a tot of whiskey or a tot of vodka or whatever, I now drank a glass.
Wow, so then you just got from bad to worse. It escalated quite fast.
Very quickly. I would down a glass, and that was that, And then I wouldn't have to change my daughter's nappy or bath her or anything like that. And that was the goal. I was trying to stay away from her because I had this deep-seated fear that I was going to hurt her.
You're going to hurt her.
And that's when it started. And that show changed my life. It really did. For the first time, I heard other men talking about the fact that they were sexually abused.
So you felt like, okay, I was not alone.
I was not alone. That's it. That was the biggest thing. Wow, this is something other guys have had experience with. And the funny thing is that, you know what, my first abuser was in fact my mother, right? So from the age of 5, she used to molest me and do things to me, right? I don't want to go into too much detail. But it was very confusing because I didn't grow up in a house where I had a mother who loved me and put me on her lap and gave me hugs and kisses and things like that. You know, my life was based on performance. It was, you know, if you make me look good as your mother, then I will reward you with some attention. If you don't, I will reward you with anger and violence and
everything else that goes with it.
That's it, yeah.
Wow. That must have been such a toxic environment, Martin.
Very. And we don't realize that. And we don't actually understand how many children are growing up in that sort of environment. And this is a big thing. You know, when we talk abuse, we talk about physical, sexual abuse. We forget about the emotional, the verbal, you know, the narcissistic abuse, poverty, anger, violence in the home, addiction in the home, mental health problems in the home. You know, and these are all traumas that impact on you as a child growing up because it changes your perspective. It changes the way that you see and interact with the world as an adult.
Yes,
you
absolutely.
know? So that's a big thing. And that's kind of, you know, I started, MatrixMen was born then, and that was 2011. I was 44 years old. So I'd been through nearly half my life.
Right.
Being this angry, addicted, really ugly person. You know, and then all of a sudden I got this awakening where I was like, okay, I can do something with this. And that's when I kind of decided that I was going to use my story to help other men start their recovery journeys. Kind of gives them permission to talk about it.
So you were basically giving other men hope that you never had.
Yes.
That, you know what, look, there is assistance available.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
And creating spaces for them to be able to get assistance.
And I think talking about it, right?
Yes,
because you weren't given that opportunity. Neither did you know platforms existed where men could talk about their abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so Martin, writing The Pumpkin Van must have required vulnerability. What did you discover about yourself in that process whilst writing The Pumpkin Van?
I discovered that I procrastinate a lot.
Okay, all right.
No, it took me 12 years to write that book, I must
12
say.
years.
12 years, yeah.
Wow.
I started off, I was counseling, I still counsel occasionally a guy from Australia who'd suffered incredible abuse. And he kept saying to me, Martin, write my story, write my story, write my stories. Please tell my story. Because and he still sometimes says to me, are you ever going to write my story? Even though I've included him in my book. But when I started writing his story. And I got halfway through, genuinely halfway through, so like 13 chapters in. And I decided, I can't do this because I don't know him well enough. I can't relate to his experience.
Yes.
So I changed it, and then I started writing my story and how I evolved to be the person helping him and other men, right? So in the book, I talk about this guy. I talk about a guy who's in prison in South Africa for murdering 3 people. Multiple murderer, and his history and how he ended up there. And then I write about gay men, and I write about Afrikaans boys who've grown up in abusive homes. And I kind of cover stories from, you know, sisters raping brothers, brothers raping brothers, strangers raping men, you know, that sort of thing. So it involves just about every form of abuse that I could think of.
So you covered everything.
I tried
every form of abuse.
Well, I tried.
For anyone that would now get their hands on the Pumpkin Van.
Yeah. I mean, I'm incredibly vulnerable in that story. I'm very honest. My mom read it, and my stepmom, by the way, she read it and she phoned me and she said, Martin, I did not think you would be that honest in the book. And I was like, if I'm not going to be honest, then why write it?
What's the point of writing?
What's the point?
So it was your way of maybe getting that, you know, closing that part of a chapter, I would say.
Of my life.
Of your life, yes.
Yeah. So I had the ability through writing that story to kind of pour out my pains, my deep-seated fears, you know, all that sort of thing I'll put into the pages of that book. I cover my life with my abusive ex-wife, for instance, you know, and then I remarried. So I write portions of the book are about my new marriage now to this incredibly beautiful, very soft, very kind and gentle woman who has to deal with this angry, this angry, crazy person, you know, and how it impacts me and how I started changing and things like that. So the book is about, yes, it's about what happened to me, but it's mainly about healing. That's the big thing.
And how you overcame that.
And how I overcame
Yes,
it.
and I think those stories also tend to give hope to people to say, look, I feel that I'm in this black hole right now.
Yeah.
But there is hope that I can, if Martin could do it, so can I.
Absolutely.
You know, I can climb out of this big black hole and live a life.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the main focuses of the book. You can heal. That's
brilliant. Martin, how has your own healing journey shaped the way you now support other men?
You know, I used to look at people and kind of judge them. You know, I used to
before
look at
you
people
got to speak to them.
Before I got to, I would like assess and go, oh, useless oak, why don't you shape up your life, you know, lose weight, get a job, you know, that sort of thing. I don't do that anymore. I've learned that I don't know your story or anybody that I meet on the street story. I can't judge them. I can't look at them and make assessments about their lives.
Exactly.
You know, so I approach, so I'm a big fan of something called narrative therapy. So in narrative therapy, we don't look at people and make assessments. We don't diagnose. We don't do that sort of stuff. We look at a person and we say a person has a problem. The problem is the problem. The person is not the problem. So we separate the person and the issues that they're having.
Right.
And we externalize them. We put them outside of themselves. So I always approach people. One of my lecturers always used to say to me, he says, always make like you're a journalist. And at the end of speaking to somebody about his life, that you be able to write their story.
Yes.
So I look at people and I'm very inquisitive. I'm always, you know, I can go and visit somebody and then within 10 minutes I'll be in the kitchen talking to their staff about their lives. And within a half an hour they'll have told me the abuse that they've suffered at the hands of their mother or their father or the fact that they was raped or whatever the case may be. And that's
so they
me.
would be totally comfortable opening up to you.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I enjoy that, yeah.
So Martin, you speak about psychological safety in the workplace as well. What does that look like in practical terms, especially for men who are often told to just toughen up?
Yes. So everything I look at is centered on the masculine because I'm a man, you know.
Yes.
I mean, I can't think like the ladies. I don't have those aspects in my life, right? So I always come at things from the perspective of the masculine, the struggles that men are going through now with DEI and being, you know, sidelined, and you know, we were good enough to build the world, but we're not good enough to run it anymore, you know, that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I look at things and you know, psychological safety talks about people not feeling judged and people not being criticized and, you know, maintaining their dignity. And I think that's a very shallow perspective, right? So I talk about the fact that, especially in the South African context, that a huge proportion of people that work in corporates or in factories or in mines or whatever the case may be are victims of tremendous trauma, right? So they've grown up in houses where firstly they have only a single parent, right? Quite often in this country, people are sent off to grow up with granny. You know? So they've grown up in homes where their parent isn't their parent, with only one parent. They grow up in poverty. They grew up in violent circumstances quite often.
Yes.
And there are so many traumas that these children suffer before they even get to the workplace. And I kind of sensitize managers. I don't want managers to become psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists. I just sensitize them to the issues that so many people face in this country and teach them how to create environments where these amazing people can thrive, okay? So quite often, I mean, we're looking at research, for instance, into things like ADHD, right? And there's a huge link between childhood trauma and people who display ADHD type behaviors.
Wow,
right?
how so, Martin? Can you just maybe elaborate a bit?
Well, let me give you an idea. It's like, it was personalize it, right?
Right.
So when I was growing up, when it got to sort of 4:30 in the afternoon, my brain would start spinning, right?
Because mom's coming home.
Mom's coming home, right? What state's mom in? Is she in a good mood? Is she in a bad mood? If she's in a good mood, what can I talk to her about to keep her in a good mood? If she's in a bad mood, what weapons are lying around that I can remove right now before she starts throwing things at me, right? If she's angry and, you know, what's my escape route? Where can I hide? What can I do? How can I try and cheer her up, you know? So I have to start thinking as a child of 5, 6, 7 years old about all these things that I shouldn't have to think about, right? Mummy's supposed to come home and go, oh, my baby, I missed you.
Yes.
Oh, how was your day? Sit me down and have a cup of coffee and, well, me a cold drink and her a coffee, and talk to me about what I did, right? How was school? Did anything happen to you at school? You know, none of that happened in my life, right?
Oh.
But the other side of it was that I had to start overthinking everything.
And at that tender age, wow.
At such a young age, right? And that to me is kind of encapsulates what ADHD is. Your brain is constantly spinning out of control. You're constantly thinking of 1,000 different things. Like my wife always says to me, can't you just watch TV? I'm going like, yeah, you know, I can, but I get bored very quickly because my brain is used to thinking ahead of things. So by the time I get halfway through the program, I've gone, well, he killed him and she's done it.
You already thought the
whole
synopsis.
I've got the whole thing. And now I'm bored, so I go scroll on my phone or play a game or something like that. And that's why there is this relation. So there's a lot of work coming out of Sweden that's saying there's a huge connection between childhood trauma and ADHD. Now, I'm turning around to companies and I'm saying to companies, if you've got 44%, let's just take 44% of men who've suffered sexual abuse as children, right, have probably developed, let's take a percentage of them, 30% of them have developed ADHD type behaviors or traits, right? These guys have the ability to look at something and not just see a course, A, B, C, D, E. They can go from A to Blue to Cape Town to Learjet and back again, you know. So they'll look at something and see 20 different outcomes from one starting point, right? Now, if we can create a space where these people can function safely or feel safe, so they're not in fight, flight, freeze brain, they're in the creative prefrontal cortex brain.
Okay.
Imagine what impact they could have on your company.
And the difference it can make, yes.
Yes.
So you're here to make that difference and
yes.
show companies that, listen, this versus that.
Yes. You know, if you take the Gallup research from 2025, they say that the world loses $8.8 trillion to disengagement. $1 trillion to disengagement in the workplace, right? So their stats are something like 21% of people are engaged in their jobs. In other words, they want to be there, they love the job, they're doing the work, all that sort of stuff.
They're intentional where they are.
Yes. The rest, disengaged.
Oh, wow.
17% of those are actively disengaged. In other words, they like trying to find an out. They're trying to get out of the company and they're actively trying to talk other people out of the company. But the rest of them are just there. So they arrive, they do their jobs, and they go home. Right? What happens if we can get that 60% to engage? Even if we get 40% of that 60% to engage in that corporate space, to be keen and excited about being there, imagine how you could change the company.
Exactly.
Totally transform it. And that to me is what psychological safety
But Martin,
is
I've got to ask now, are companies forthcoming with this type of proposals when you take it to them, or are they still holding back? Because I would think, and I think you can agree with me or correct me if I'm wrong, there's still a lot of stigma attached, like we don't need this kind of thing. You know,
yes,
we don't go through this kind of thing. So
you know, the thing is with
thank
corporates,
you, but no thank you.
Yes, yeah, a lot of that, by the way. Corporates are kind of looking at things and going, okay, you know, psychological safety is not something that we get a lot of checklists for.
Okay.
Right? We're looking at behaviors. We're looking at trying to protect people. What I've done is I've taken it from a totally different perspective. I'm speaking to team leaders, to managers, and I'm saying this is how you must change your behavior.
Okay, so you're putting the ball in their court now.
In their court,
All right.
in order that your team can perform at a high rate.
Right.
Okay, and that's the approach that I'm taking. So yeah, I'm currently negotiating with a very large mining company to get into that space, and they're looking at it from the masculine perspective. So they want me to talk to their staff and talk to their staff about changing behaviors. And I kind of smiled and said, well, it's not really about the staff changing behaviors, right? It's about you guys changing your behaviors, the management and the officers. So it's starting to open up, you know. So companies are looking at it going like, you know what, it's not a checklist.
Yeah, there's no right way.
I must do this, I must do that, I must do this. It's not. It's about training your managers and your team leaders and all that sort of thing.
So there's a process, obviously, right?
Yes, yes. And I give them that process. Yeah.
Okay, so Martin, how can companies meaningfully include men in the DEI conversations without diminishing the focus on women's rights and safety?
Yeah. So let's look at the mining space, for instance. So
Right.
we have a huge drive to get women into mining, right?
Okay.
So there is massive amounts of money being spent on trying to adjust safety equipment and the heavy equipment that is used underground. You know, for instance, the survival pack that men carry weighs a couple of kilos. And
Wow.
you know, it's one thing, you put it on, you walk around for a half an hour with it, but put it
The
on,
entire day.
go underground to 48 to 50 degree Celsius temperatures and walk around with that the whole day and see how you feel. It trains you, it really does. So they're looking at changing things like that. So I'm saying what often happens in this environment, and it is a disgusting behavior, is that a woman will go underground and the men will say to them, okay, we'll help you, but we want compensation. We want something
Okay.
in, so sexual favors, that sort of stuff. So I'm saying, well, let's get into that space and talk to these men and say, why is your perspective that sex heals and fixes everything, you know? So let's open it up and create a space where they can actually start speaking about things that might have happened to them, right? So I'm going in there and we're talking to the men and we're finding leaders and identifying leaders so that they can start structures within the various mining fraternities where the men can sit down and speak to each other safely. They can say, listen, this is what's happened to me at home. You know, I've got 10 children and I don't earn enough to pay for the 10 children. And so they can openly, safely speak about things that they're going through.
So creating a safe space, I think.
That's
and I
it.
think that's imperative, Martin.
Absolutely.
Okay, South Africa faces, like you said, an extremely high rates of GBV. How directly do you believe this links to unresolved trauma in men?
Well, let's look at this. One of the studies, the study that said 44% of all boys have been sexually abused by the age of 18, right, in South Africa. That was conducted back in 2000, was published in 2008. And one of the spin-offs from was that they discovered that men who've suffered rape or sexual abuse as children, right, are 4 times more likely to perpetrate a rape.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Now, when we look at who perpetrates that sexual crime on those boys, 41% of those are women. Right? So 41% are women, 27% of both were raped by both male and female, and 32% men. And we find in that boys who've been raped by women are going out and raping women because they did it to me, I can do it to them. That's what I was
that same
taught.
hurt, they want to manifest that same hurt into
It's
the
not,
next
I don't
person.
think it's a case of hurt. I think it's a case of, well, this is how you do it. You don't ask, you just take. You know, when I was a 12-year-old boy and my 40-year-old teacher came and slept with me, she didn't ask me, she just took me, right? So that's how we do it. This is how we've been taught to interact with the opposite sex. And that's, I think, where there hasn't, this is speculation, right? There hasn't been deep-seated research into this whole thing, and I'd like to see that sort of thing happen. But I just have a feeling from the men I've spoken to, from the people that I've interacted with, I mean, you don't become a rapist because you want to.
No,
You know, you're not born going like, when I grow up, I want to rape women. That's what I want. Well, I want to beat my wife. You're taught that sort of thing. That's learned behavior.
So, Martin, for any of our viewers watching this, and they may have gone through some form of abuse in their lives, how do they overcome it, or how do they come out of that dark hole that they may be finding themselves in, but maybe in denial, or maybe feeling that there's no way out? I may as well just continue with my life because this is normal, which you've clearly pointed out, it is not normal.
No.
It is not okay to be living like this. Like you said, you had the picket fence, you had the house, you had the car, you had the kids, everything done by the book, but something was missing. So what would your message be to men or any of our viewers watching this that, their relatives or someone they know may be going through this right now with no way out?
Well, let's highlight what sort of man, I mean, how do I know if a man that I know is doing this sort of thing? So men are taught basically 5 coping mechanisms in life. So instead of, we're not taught to cry and say, I'm sad and I'm feeling so emotional.
But Martin, why? I've got to stop you this. Why is it that men are taught from such a young age by maybe their dads or whatever the case, or whoever the case may be,
their moms mostly.
Please don't cry.
Yes.
Okay, I'm one mom that tells my son, look, if you need to express your emotions, go ahead and cry. I'm here to hold you. I'm here to sort out your emotions. Crying, feeling vulnerable is okay. It's not that you are a man, you're not allowed to cry. it's not that you, a man, that you're not allowed to feel sad or depressed. Come to me.
Yes.
Speak about it.
Yeah.
And I think more women, like you just said, moms out there are guilty of this. But many women need to then start changing that mindset. Would you agree with me?
Absolutely.
To say that, look, you're the first point of contact your son's going to go to.
Yes.
And if you're already pushing him back and saying, no, men don't cry,
Yes.
men don't need to talk about their emotions,
Yeah.
you just need to stay strong.
I think one of the big things is that a lot of moms grew up without fathers,
Okay.
right? And then a lot of young boys are growing up without fathers. 68% fatherlessness in this country. It's very high. So mommies grow up with this concept of, I need to raise my son tough. And so they bring in that old patriarchal kind of theory that, you must, toughen up, don't cry. Cowboys don't cry, that sort of thing. And that's why they're raised not to feel emotions, right? But they develop these 5 skills, and then I always call it's sex, silence, addiction, anger, and sports, right? So I show how tough I am through sex, having sex with as many women as I can, because it proves I'm a man, I'm a real man, Truth is that it drains you more than it actually proves you're a masculine man, because what you're looking for is connection, not physical interactions, right? Silence. So I'm not supposed to talk about my pain. So I'll just keep quiet. I withdraw. Sports. So sports is the one place I can show my emotions. If my team is winning, I'm happy. If my team is losing, I'm sad. I'm angry. So I can safely show my emotions in those sports, right? The other one is anger. So if somebody's constantly getting angry at the slightest provocation, that's a big warning sign. And of course, addiction, drinking too much. So think about the men in your life. How many of them have to get drunk every time they open one beer? They have to have 10 and then fall down. There's a lot of guys out there that are struggling with that. So you need to look at those. And generally, somebody who displays 3 or 4 of those, or 2 or 3 of those, will be somebody who's suffered pain and anguish in their lives.
So that's a red flag.
That's a red flag, definitely. Yeah. So for you young girls want to get into relationships, remember those 5.
Look out for those 5 things.
Yes, yeah. And then just understand that you're not alone. That's a big thing. And if you finally find the courage to talk about it, then you get a hold of either myself or my organization, MatrixMen. Yeah.
So are you on social media, Martin? On
Big time.
MatrixMen?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
MatrixMen and Martin Pelders.
All right.
So, yeah.
So Martin, what impact do you hope MatrixMen will have in the next 10 years?
My biggest dream, and it's a huge one, is that we will reduce fatherlessness, that we will help reduce rape and femicide and GBV, and that is the ultimate dream.
And it's going to take a lot of work, right?
Huge amount of work, yeah. So I'm
but it
currently...
starts one home at a time, right? It starts from one home at a
Yes.
time, making that difference one home at a time.
Yeah. I started off trying to talk to the men. They don't listen. They're still too scared to come out and talk about these things. So I started talking to the wives.
Right.
Now I'm speaking to therapists and
Okay.
doctors, and I'm trying to educate therapists. So through the college that I've studied at, I'm trying to set up therapists who will specialize in dealing with men, right? Because therapy for men and therapy for women are different,
Totally two different
two
spheres.
different things.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so Martin, please tell me one motivational quote that gets you through the day for the benefit of our viewers.
That's my favorite is one from Henry Ford, and he says, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Okay, brilliant. Martin, I want to thank you so much. This has been such an inspiring segment. I want to thank you and wish you all the very best for any of your ventures going forward. Thank you so much for joining me on Visionary Pulse.
Thank you so much for the invite.
So that brings us to the conclusion of another wonderful segment of Visionary Pulse with me, your host, Farzana Mayet. Join me again next week as we chat to another game changer and change maker. Good night. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.